It was just another quiet morning in the small town. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft glow through the kitchen window. Birds chirped lazily outside, and a warm breeze fluttered through the open window, bringing with it the fresh scent of spring. Inside, the small kitchen was calm, except for the gentle hum of the coffee maker and the soft sound of a tea kettle whistling on the stove. James sat at the kitchen table, sipping his tea. He had always loved the quiet mornings before everything got busy. His daughter, Emma, was sitting nearby, playing with her toys. She was a little shy and often kept to herself, but her bright eyes and innocent smile always made James's heart swell with pride. It had been just the two of them for so long, and even though he had recently remarried, things hadn't quite felt the same. Carla, his new wife, was sweet. She was kind to Emma when James was around, always putting on a warm smile and trying to bond with his daughter. But deep down, James felt something was off. There were moments when Carla's kindness seemed forced, almost like it was a performance. He tried to brush it off, thinking it was just his own insecurities getting in the way. After all, Carla had her own children, and Emma was still adjusting to having a stepmom. But this morning, something was different. James hadn't noticed at first. His mind was lost in the warmth of his tea and the thoughts of the busy day ahead. But then he heard it, the soft, tiny sound of something falling. Emma's hand had knocked over his teacup, sending the hot liquid splashing across the table and onto the floor. It was an accident, of course, but the noise startled both of them. James blinked, his heart racing a little as he looked at the mess. "Emma," he said gently, "what happened?" Emma, who had been sitting quietly playing with her doll, suddenly froze. Her eyes widened in panic, and for a moment, she looked almost like a deer caught in headlights. She stood up slowly, her small hands trembling, unsure of what to do. James could feel his own frustration building, but he didn't want to yell at her. After all, she was just a little girl, and accidents happened. He sighed, setting his teacup down on the table. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly, trying to ease her fear. "Don't worry. I'll clean it up." But Emma didn't move. She stood there, staring at the floor, her small hands still trembling. James frowned. It was strange how long she had stayed silent. Normally, she would apologize immediately, or at least try to help clean up the mess. James noticed the way she was looking at the spilled tea, almost like she was afraid of it. Then, without warning, she whispered something, so softly he almost didn't hear it. "She hurts me when you're not here." James's heart skipped a beat, his breath caught in his chest, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze around him. He looked at Emma, trying to make sense of her words. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. He leaned in a little, his heart racing with confusion and concern. Emma blinked, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Her voice was barely audible, but her words hit James like a ton of bricks. "She hurts me, Daddy. When you leave the house, she says bad things. She makes me scared." James's stomach twisted into a knot. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for her, pulling her close. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Who hurts you? Is it Carla?" Emma nodded slowly, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "When you go to work, she's not nice. She calls me names and tells me to stay quiet. I'm not allowed to talk." James's heart pounded in his chest. He had been so focused on his own life, trying to blend his new family together, that he hadn't seen the signs. He had trusted Carla, believed she would be a good stepmom to Emma. But now, Emma's words shook him to the core. Emma pulled away from him slightly, glancing nervously at the doorway, as though she feared Carla might walk in at any moment. "I don't want her to be mad at me, Daddy. I just want her to be nice." James hugged her tighter, his mind racing. He had never seen Emma so scared, so vulnerable. He had no idea how long this had been going on, how much Emma had been hiding from him. The guilt hit him hard, like a wave crashing over him. How could he have been so blind? How could he have missed the signs? "I'm sorry, Emma," he whispered, holding her close. "I'm so sorry. I'll make sure you're safe. I promise." He wiped away her tears and kissed the top of her head. "You don't ever have to be scared again, okay? I'm going to take care of you, I promise." But inside, James's mind was already spinning, trying to figure out what to do next. He couldn't ignore this. He couldn't let his daughter live in fear. He had to protect her, no matter what. Emma stayed in his arms for a moment, still trembling. "I don't like it when she makes me stay in my room," Emma whispered. "She tells me I'm not allowed to leave." James swallowed hard. The pieces were starting to fall into place. He had to do something. He couldn't let this go on any longer. But as he looked down at his daughter, he knew that everything was about to change. James couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The words Emma had whispered earlier echoed in his mind, rattling his nerves. "She hurts me when you're not here." He had always tried to maintain a sense of calm in his life, but right now, everything felt like it was falling apart. His daughter, the little girl he'd spent years raising on his own, was scared. Scared of the woman he had invited into their home. The house was eerily quiet after Emma's confession, the only sound being the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Emma had gone silent again, retreating to the couch, hugging her stuffed bunny tightly. She looked so small and fragile, as though the weight of her fears had grown too much for her to carry. James tried to focus, tried to think clearly, but his thoughts were jumbled, tangled in a web of doubt and concern. He looked at the doorway leading to the hallway, where Carla's room was. She had gone to bed early the night before, tired from a long day at work. But that wasn't unusual. Carla had always been a bit distant, especially in the mornings. James had often thought it was just the stress of balancing her job and being a stepmom, but now he wasn't so sure. Could Emma have been telling the truth? Could Carla really be hurting her? James stood up and paced the room, trying to calm the rising panic inside him. "No," he told himself. "It can't be true. I need to be sure." But deep down, a part of him feared that Emma had been suffering in silence for far too long. He went to the window and stared outside. The sun had risen higher now, casting bright rays of sunlight over the neighborhood. It looked so peaceful out there. The world seemed unaware of the storm brewing inside his home. He was torn. On one hand, he didn't want to believe that Carla could be capable of harming Emma. She was, after all, the woman he'd chosen to marry, the woman he trusted. But the other part of him, his father's instinct, the protective, fierce love he felt for his daughter, knew he couldn't just ignore what Emma had said. James took a deep breath and turned back to Emma. She was still sitting on the couch, her legs pulled up to her chest. Her big brown eyes were fixed on the floor. She hadn't said a word since she'd whispered the truth to him, but he could see the fear in her face. "Sweetheart," James said gently, walking over to her. "I need to talk to you, okay? You can tell me everything. I'm here for you." Emma glanced up at him with wide eyes. She hesitated for a moment, biting her lip, but then she nodded. "Daddy, she told me not to say anything. She said you wouldn't believe me." James knelt down beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You can tell me anything, Emma. I promise I will always believe you." Emma's bottom lip trembled, and she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "She tells me I'm a bad girl. She says I'm ugly. She makes me feel small." The words hit James like a punch to the gut. His heart broke for his daughter. He had always thought that Carla was a kind woman, someone who could love Emma like her own. But hearing this, he couldn't deny it anymore. There was something dark lurking in Carla's actions, something that was hurting his daughter. James swallowed hard, his mind racing. How could she do this? How could she make Emma feel like this? Emma wiped her tears away and took a deep breath. "I don't want to be in trouble, Daddy. Please don't make her angry." James's chest tightened at the sound of his daughter's voice. She shouldn't have to worry about making anyone angry, least of all the woman who was supposed to care for her. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He should have seen the signs, should have known that something wasn't right. But he had been so caught up in his own world, in his own struggles with balancing a new marriage and raising a child, that he had missed it. He hugged Emma tightly, his heart aching for her. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have paid more attention, but I promise you, I will take care of you. I will make sure you're safe." He pulled away from her, determined to get to the bottom of this. "I need to talk to Carla. I need to understand what's going on. You stay here, okay? I'll be right back." Emma nodded, but she didn't look relieved. Her eyes were full of worry, as if she feared the confrontation that was about to happen. James kissed the top of her head, trying to reassure her, before walking toward the hallway. He knew that whatever happened next would change everything. He had to confront Carla, but he wasn't sure what he would find. Would she deny everything? Would she try to cover it up? Or would the truth finally come out? As James approached the bedroom door, his hand trembled slightly. He took a deep breath and knocked. "Carla," he called softly, "can we talk?" There was a pause, and then the door creaked open. Carla stood in the doorway, looking surprised to see him. Her eyes darted briefly toward the living room, where Emma was sitting quietly on the couch. "James," Carla said, her voice a little more sharp than usual. "What's wrong?" James couldn't keep the fear and anger out of his voice. "I need to know the truth, Carla. About Emma." Carla's face hardened. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" James took a step forward, his heart pounding. "Emma told me everything. She said you've been hurting her, making her feel small and worthless. Is it true?" The silence that followed was deafening. Carla's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she quickly composed herself. "James, you've got to be kidding me. She's just a kid. You're letting her fill your head with lies." But James wasn't convinced. The tension in the room grew thick, and for the first time, he wasn't sure who he could trust. James stood in the doorway of the bedroom, his heart pounding in his chest. Carla's dismissive response stung him more than he had anticipated. He had hoped, for a moment, that maybe Emma had been mistaken, that there was some misunderstanding, some innocent explanation. But the way Carla had reacted told him everything he needed to know. The unease gnawed at his stomach, growing heavier with each passing second. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His thoughts raced. He needed to be calm, logical. But as the weight of his daughter's words pressed down on him, his mind swirled with anger and betrayal. He had trusted Carla with everything, but now he wasn't sure who she really was. Was she the woman he had fallen in love with? Or was she something else entirely? Someone capable of hurting the one person he loved more than anything else in the world? Carla crossed her arms defensively. Her eyes flickered toward Emma, who was still sitting in the living room, as though she could feel the storm building between them. The silence stretched, the tension thick and suffocating. "James, you're overreacting. She's just a child. You know how kids can be, right? They make up stories." Carla's voice was cold, calculated. "You can't let her manipulate you like this." James shook his head. The doubt that had been growing inside him now solidified into certainty. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Carla was trying to deflect, trying to turn the blame on Emma, as if the accusation were somehow her fault. "No, Carla, I don't believe that. I believe Emma," James said, his voice firm, his determination growing stronger. "She's scared. She's been hiding this for who knows how long." Carla's face tightened, her jaw clenched as she stepped closer to him. "You don't know what you're talking about, James. She's just a little girl. She's confused." James took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "No, Carla. You don't get to twist this. I'm her father, and I know when something isn't right. She's not lying." A flicker of something crossed Carla's face. Fear, anger. It was hard to tell. But in that moment, James knew he wasn't going to get the truth from her easily. Carla was hiding something. He could see it in her eyes, the way she refused to meet his gaze for long. The excuses, the half-hearted explanations, they weren't enough. His daughter's safety was on the line, and he couldn't let this go. "James, please," Carla pleaded, her voice shaking slightly. "You have to trust me. I love you both. I would never do anything to hurt Emma." James's heart twisted at her words, but he refused to let her sway him. "No, Carla. If you truly loved her, you wouldn't have made her feel the way she does. You wouldn't have let her believe she's worthless." Carla's expression darkened. "That's not fair, James. You don't know what it's like. You don't know how hard it is to raise a child who isn't yours. I've tried. I've tried so hard to make this work." Her voice cracked toward the end of the sentence, but James wasn't buying it. He had seen the moments, the sharp words, the cold glances, the way she looked at Emma when she thought no one was watching. Carla wasn't trying. She had been hurting Emma in ways that no child should ever endure. And James couldn't ignore it anymore. "I'm done, Carla," James said, his voice low but resolute. "I can't stand by and watch you do this to my daughter. If you truly care about me, you'll leave. You need to get help. You're not the woman I thought you were." Carla's face flushed, her lips trembling. "You're kicking me out. After everything we've been through." James didn't flinch. "I'm protecting my daughter. That's all that matters now. You can leave, or I'll call someone who can help you." There was a long pause as Carla stood there, her eyes flickering between James and the door. For a moment, she said nothing, as though she were trying to find the words to justify her actions. But in the end, it seemed like there were no words left. She turned and stormed toward the door, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. "You don't understand, James," she spat as she grabbed her bag from the floor. "You'll regret this. You'll see." With that, she slammed the door behind her, leaving James standing in the doorway, his chest tight and his mind racing. He couldn't help but feel a deep ache in his heart. The woman he had once loved, who had once been a part of his life, a part of Emma's life, was now a stranger to him. He didn't know what had happened to her, what had driven her to this point. But whatever it was, it had cost her everything. James stood there for a few moments, his mind spinning. He knew this wasn't over. He knew he had just made a decision that would change everything, that would affect the future of his family in ways he couldn't even imagine yet. But in his heart, he knew it was the right decision. The sound of footsteps in the living room broke him from his thoughts. He turned around, and there stood Emma, her eyes wide, watching him silently. She had heard everything. He could see the confusion and fear in her expression, but there was something else too. Hope. "Daddy," Emma said softly, her voice trembling. "Is she gone?" James nodded, his throat tight. He walked over to her, crouching down to her level. "She's gone, sweetheart. You don't have to be scared anymore." Emma's face brightened, and she rushed into his arms, holding him tightly. For the first time, in a long time, James felt like he had made the right choice. He held Emma close, vowing that he would never let anyone hurt her again. But deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, but he would fight for his daughter's safety, and he would make sure that no one, especially Carla, would ever hurt her again. The days following Carla's departure were quiet, eerily so. James had expected to feel relief, but instead there was a hollow emptiness in the house. The place that had once been filled with laughter, love, and even the tension of family life, now felt cold and silent. He missed Emma's smiles, but he also missed the small, everyday moments, morning coffees together, the soft rustle of Carla moving about the house, the sounds of their small but cozy life. But as much as he missed those things, he knew he had done the right thing. The heavy weight in his chest when Carla had walked out the door was not regret, but a deep sense of resolve. He had chosen his daughter, and there would be no going back. Emma was his responsibility, and her safety was now his priority above everything else. James sat at the kitchen table, staring down at his phone, The screen dimmed from lack of use. He had avoided checking it, afraid of the messages he might have missed or the phone calls he didn't want to take. But he couldn't avoid it forever. With a deep breath, he scrolled through the notifications, his fingers hesitating as he saw several missed calls from Carla. The anger from their last confrontation flared up inside him, but he ignored it. He had nothing left to say to her. His mind was focused on something far more important, Emma's healing. He put the phone down and stood up, walking to the living room where Emma sat on the couch, hugging a stuffed animal close to her chest. She had been quieter since Carla left. Of course, she was only 7, and the trauma of the past few weeks had left its mark on her. Emma hadn't yet fully grasped what had happened, but James could see the changes in her. She was more withdrawn, more cautious, like she was afraid to trust again. "Hey, sweetie," James said softly, sitting next to her. "How are you feeling today?" Emma didn't look up at him immediately. She fiddled with the bear in her hands, her fingers twisting the fabric. It was a habit she had when she was nervous. After a few moments, she turned to face him, her big brown eyes full of uncertainty. "I don't know, Daddy," she said quietly. "I don't know if I'm happy or sad." James' heart ached for her. He could feel the weight of her emotions. Confusion, fear, sadness. He had to be strong for her, but it wasn't easy. He hadn't expected this to be the aftermath. He had expected anger, or maybe even a sense of victory. But what he was seeing in Emma's eyes was something far more fragile, an innocence that had been shaken, a child who didn't quite understand the world around her anymore. "I know, sweetheart," he said gently, pulling her into his arms. "You've been through a lot, but I want you to know things are going to get better. You're safe now, okay? No one is going to hurt you." Emma nodded but didn't speak. James rubbed her back, trying to soothe her, wishing he could take away the pain she was feeling. But there was no magic fix for this. It would take time, lots of time, and a lot of patience from both of them. For the next few days, James did everything he could think of to help Emma heal. He took her to the park, spent extra time reading her favorite books, and made sure they had dinner together every night at the same time. He even tried to create new routines, simple things to bring a sense of normalcy back into their lives. But Emma still seemed distant, as though a part of her was holding back. He couldn't blame her. Trust had been shattered, and it wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. All he could do was give her the love and support she needed, even if it meant being patient and waiting for her to come to him when she was ready. One afternoon, after a long day of playing outside, James decided it was time for them to talk. They had been quiet for a while, and though Emma seemed like she was doing okay, James could feel the walls she had built around herself. It was time to break them down, gently and carefully. He called Emma over as they sat on the couch together, the sunlight filtering through the windows, casting a soft glow over the room. "Emma," James began, his voice soft but steady. "I know this hasn't been easy, and I know you're still feeling confused about everything. But I want you to know, you can always talk to me about anything. If you ever feel scared or sad, or if something's bothering you, you don't have to keep it inside. Okay?" Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and uncertainty. "But what if I tell you something that makes you mad? What if you get upset like you did with Carla?" James felt a lump form in his throat. "Sweetheart, I'm not going to get mad at you. I'm not like that. You can tell me anything, and I promise I'll listen. I want you to feel safe here with me. I want you to know that no matter what, I'm always on your side." Emma hesitated, her gaze flickering to the floor. James didn't press her, not yet. He had learned from the past few days that pushing her would only make her retreat further into herself. But he knew his daughter. He knew that if he gave her the space she needed, eventually she would open up. He just had to be patient. "Do you want me to tell you a secret, Daddy?" Emma asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. James smiled, his heart swelling with love for his little girl. "Of course, sweetheart. You can tell me anything." Emma looked up at him, her expression more serious than he had ever seen. "I miss Mom," she said quietly. "I miss her a lot." The words hit James like a wave. Of course she did. Emma was a little girl, and no matter how cruel Carla had been, she had still been her mother. That bond, no matter how strained, was still there. James fought to keep his composure, swallowing the lump in his throat. He couldn't let Emma see his pain. He had to be strong for her, even when it hurt. "I know, sweetheart," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "It's okay to miss her. It's okay to feel sad. But remember, you're not alone. You have me, and I'll always be here for you. We'll get through this together." Emma nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes that wouldn't go away. James hugged her tighter, trying to reassure her with his warmth. He didn't know what the future held, but he was certain of one thing. He would never let anyone hurt her again. The next few weeks were a quiet struggle for both James and Emma. The house was no longer filled with the constant hum of family life. It felt like a place where time slowed down, where days blurred together, and the only things that kept them going were the routines James had established to provide a sense of normalcy. James knew he couldn't rush Emma's healing. He had learned over the past few weeks that sometimes the best thing he could do for her was just be present. Still, a part of him longed for the spark that once radiated from his little girl. He missed hearing her laughter and seeing the joy she used to have in the little things. Every time he caught a glimpse of her looking out the window, lost in thought, or staring at her old toys, it reminded him of how much she had changed. One afternoon, as James was preparing dinner, he heard Emma's voice from the living room. At first, it was quiet, a faint whisper, so soft that he almost missed it. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. "Daddy, come here." His heart skipped a beat. He rushed into the living room, not sure what to expect, but hoping that whatever it was, it meant Emma was opening up. Emma was sitting on the floor, surrounded by the stuffed animals she had once adored. But this time, there was something different about the way she sat, something that James hadn't seen in weeks, a sense of calm, a sense of peace. She wasn't clutching her favorite bear to her chest, as she had done so many times before when she felt scared or sad. Instead, she was staring at the small wooden box that sat in front of her, a box James hadn't seen in years. It was a box he had nearly forgotten about. It had once belonged to Carla, and inside it were old memories, the kind of memories that James had tried to bury after the divorce. Pictures, trinkets, keepsakes that Carla had kept throughout the years, things that had once meant something to them both, things that had once made him believe that their family was whole, that everything would be all right. Now, the box seemed like nothing more than a symbol of everything they had lost. "What's that, sweetie?" James asked cautiously, kneeling down beside her. Emma's eyes flickered toward him, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled. It was a small, tentative smile, but it was there, a flicker of the girl she used to be. "This is the box you and Mom used to keep," she said softly. "I found it in the closet." James' heart tightened. He had kept that box in the back of the closet, out of sight, in hopes that the past would stay buried. But Emma's curiosity had led her to it. She had always been inquisitive, and in some ways, that was a gift. She wasn't afraid to ask questions, even when the answers were difficult. James took a deep breath and sat down beside her. He could see the confusion in her eyes, the need to understand what all of these things meant. He knew this was a moment of reckoning, not just for Emma, but for him too. They needed to face the past before they could move forward. "I know," James said quietly. "That was a special box. It has a lot of memories in it." Emma opened the box carefully, as if she were afraid to disturb something precious. Inside, there were photographs, some old and faded, some still vibrant with color. There were letters, small notes between him and Carla from the early years of their relationship. And there, at the very bottom of the box, was a silver locket, the one Carla had worn on their wedding day. James had never been able to get rid of it. It was one of the few things that remained from the years before the pain had started, before everything had fallen apart. Emma picked up the locket with trembling fingers. She didn't ask about it. She simply held it, her small hands cradling it gently. It was as if she was trying to understand its significance, trying to piece together the story of a life she hadn't fully known. "Daddy, why did she leave?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. The question was quiet, but the weight of it crushed James. James didn't know how to answer right away. He had spent so much time trying to shield Emma from the hurt, trying to protect her from the reality of what had happened. But she was old enough to see the cracks, to understand that something had broken. She had witnessed enough to know that Carla's departure wasn't just a momentary thing. It was the end of something, a loss that James couldn't fix with empty words or promises. "Sometimes people make choices, sweetheart," he began softly. "And not all choices are the right ones. Your mom, she wasn't the person we needed her to be. But that doesn't mean she didn't love you. You're her daughter, and that will never change." Emma's eyes shone with a quiet sadness. She looked at the locket one more time before gently placing it back in the box. "I miss her," Emma whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. James reached over, pulling her into his arms. This was the moment he had feared, but it was also the moment he knew had to come. Emma was grieving, and it wasn't just for the absence of Carla. It was for the loss of a mother's love, for the sense of stability that had been taken away from her. "I know, sweetheart," he said softly. "I know, and it's okay to miss her, but we're going to be okay. You and me, we'll make it through this. Together." Emma clung to him, and for the first time in weeks, James felt a shift. It wasn't a grand moment of healing, but it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had kept Emma from fully opening up to him. Maybe they hadn't completely healed yet, but this was progress. The road ahead was still uncertain, but James felt a glimmer of hope. He was still her father, and as long as he was breathing, he would fight for her. They sat together in silence for a while, the weight of the moment heavy but necessary, and for the first time in a long time, James felt like they were starting to take small steps forward. The days following that emotional moment were quieter, yet there was a noticeable shift in the air around James and Emma. The weight that had previously hung over them seemed to lessen, if only just. It wasn't that everything had suddenly been fixed, but they were both taking small steps toward healing. For the first time in weeks, Emma seemed to be more herself, less burdened by the silence that had gripped her since her mother's departure. James, too, began to feel a sense of hope, the kind of hope that had been hard to find when everything felt lost. One morning, James woke up to the sound of Emma humming. It wasn't a song he recognized, but the tune was soft and gentle, the kind of melody that made his heart feel lighter. He smiled, stretching as he got out of bed, a sense of warmth filling him. It had been a long time since he had heard Emma hum in the morning. It had been a sound that had been absent for far too long. When he walked into the kitchen, he found Emma sitting at the table, a small notebook in front of her. Her hair was messy, and she was wearing one of her old, faded t-shirts, but there was a spark in her eyes, a kind of light that hadn't been there before. She wasn't fully healed, but she was starting to emerge from the darkness she had been trapped in. "Morning, Daddy," she said cheerfully, her voice bright. "I was just writing some stuff down." James walked over to her, his heart swelling with pride. It had been a while since Emma had opened up in this way. Writing, he thought, was a good sign. It meant she was processing her emotions in a healthy way, expressing herself, even if it was just through words on paper. "What are you writing about?" James asked, taking the seat beside her. Emma looked up from her notebook, her expression serious. "Just stuff that's been on my mind," she said, as if she were carefully choosing her words. "Like how everything feels different now, and how I'm still really mad at Mom." James's smile faded slightly at the mention of Carla. He had hoped Emma wouldn't carry around that anger forever, but he also understood it. Anger was a part of the healing process, a necessary step. She needed to let it out before she could fully move on. "I get that," James said quietly. "It's okay to be mad. You've been through a lot. It's important that you feel what you feel, Emma. But remember, holding on to that anger doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human." Emma nodded slowly, her fingers nervously flipping through the pages of her notebook. I guess I just want to know why she left. Why she didn't even try to fix things." James felt a pang in his chest. He knew the answer wasn't simple, and it was one he'd never really been able to explain. Carla's departure had been a complicated mess of emotions and broken promises, and the truth was, he didn't have all the answers. Not for himself, and certainly not for Emma. "I don't know, sweetie," James said, his voice soft. "I don't think she knew what to do either. But I want you to know that none of it was your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. You were loved, and you still are. I'm here. I'm always going to be here." Emma didn't say anything for a long time. Instead, she reached for a small piece of paper from her notebook and handed it to him. It was a drawing. A simple one, but it struck James deeply. The drawing showed a father and a daughter, holding hands. They were walking through a field of flowers, a bright sun overhead. There was a sense of peace in the image, an innocence that James had longed for Emma to find again. The days turned into weeks, and the weight of the past seemed to lift, little by little. Emma, still carrying the scars of her past, was now more than just a shadow of the girl she once was. Her laughter, though soft and cautious, began to echo through the house once again. It wasn't that everything was fixed, or that the scars from her mother's departure had vanished, but there was a growing sense of healing. A slow, steady rebuilding of what had once been broken. James watched his daughter closely, noticing the small things. The way her smile no longer seemed forced, the way she played with the neighborhood kids with genuine joy, the way her eyes lit up when they talked about the future. It was still fragile, but it was real. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room, Emma turned to her father with a look of determination on her face. There was a question in her eyes, and James knew she had been carrying it around for a while. He set down the book he was reading and gave her his full attention. "Daddy," she began slowly, her voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking about Mom." James swallowed hard, his heart aching. He had always feared this moment, the moment when Emma would finally ask the questions he wasn't ready to answer. He took a deep breath and nodded, encouraging her to continue. "I don't want to be angry anymore," Emma said, her voice trembling just slightly. "But I don't know how to let go of all the hurt." James felt a lump form in his throat. He had been waiting for Emma to reach this point, the point where she realized that forgiveness, or at least acceptance, was the key to her healing. But the truth was, he didn't know if he was ready to forgive Carla himself. He wasn't sure he ever would be. "Sweetheart," James said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "letting go of hurt doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean everything is okay. It just means that you're choosing to not let it control you anymore. I know it's hard, but it's the only way to find peace." Emma stared down at her hands for a long moment, and James could see the wheels turning in her mind. He knew this wasn't something that could be solved in one conversation, but he also knew that this was a step, a big one. She was trying. She was learning. "I don't think I'm ready to forgive her," Emma admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to stop being angry all the time." James reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to forgive her right now, Emma. It's okay to not have all the answers. You're still figuring things out, and that's okay." They sat in silence for a while, both of them lost in their thoughts. James thought back to the days when Carla had left. He had tried so hard to keep the family together, to hold on to what they had, but in the end, it wasn't enough. He had spent so much time trying to protect Emma from the pain, trying to shield her from the broken pieces of their family, that he hadn't realized how much of the burden she was carrying. Now, watching her begin to process the hurt, he felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow. He was proud of her strength, but he also wished she didn't have to carry so much weight at such a young age. A few days later, James took Emma to the park. They had made it a weekly tradition, a way to get out of the house and spend time together without the distractions of the world. As they sat on a bench, watching the kids play on the swings, Emma suddenly spoke up. "Do you think Mom will ever come back?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with curiosity. James felt the weight of the question press against him once again. He had been hoping Emma would stop asking it, but he knew better. She needed closure, and that wasn't something he could give her. But he also knew he couldn't lie to her. "I don't know, sweetie," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I honestly don't. But I do know one thing. We'll be okay, no matter what happens." Emma looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled. It wasn't a perfect smile, but it was real. There was still so much she had to work through. But in that moment, James saw the hope in her eyes that he had been searching for. It wasn't about whether Carla would come back or not. It was about Emma finding the strength to move forward, to build a life for herself, with or without her mother. As they sat there, the sound of laughter and the distant chatter of children filled the air. James realized that despite everything that had happened, they had survived. They had come through the worst of it, and now they were on the other side. The road ahead would still be difficult, but they would walk it together, side by side. In the days that followed, James continued to be the steady force Emma needed. He made sure to be there for every school event, every small triumph, and every challenge. He was her rock, and though he didn't have all the answers, he knew one thing for certain. He would never give up on her. And Emma, for the first time in a long time, started to believe in the possibility of a future beyond the hurt. She started to trust again. Slowly, but surely, she was finding peace. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but Emma was learning to forgive. Not just her mother, but herself too. The weeks that followed were filled with small victories, moments of triumph over the long shadow of the past. Emma had begun to return to her old self, the girl who once radiated hope and joy, before the world had dimmed her light. But the healing was not complete. It was a journey that still had its tough days, its quiet struggles. James continued to stand by her side, every day showing her that his love for her was unwavering, no matter the darkness that had come before. He knew it wouldn't be an easy road to navigate. His heart still ached every time he saw Emma glance at the door, as if waiting for Carla to walk back into their lives. But she never did. And as time passed, Emma began to find strength in that silence. It was late one evening when the last piece of their puzzle clicked into place, a moment neither of them would ever forget. James was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when he heard a soft knock on the door. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, confused. He hadn't been expecting anyone. Emma had been in her room, working on her homework, the house quiet except for the occasional sound of her pencil scratching on paper. The knock came again, more insistent this time. James walked to the door, wondering who it could be at this hour. When he opened it, he found a familiar face. It was Carla. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. James didn't know how to react. A part of him wanted to slam the door shut and pretend he hadn't seen her. Another part of him was filled with so many questions. Why had she come back now? What could she possibly want? Carla stood there, her eyes filled with sorrow, her face tired and worn. The years had not been kind to her. The woman James had once known as the love of his life seemed so different now, almost like a stranger. I need to talk to you," Carla said softly, her voice trembling. James hesitated. He didn't want to hear it. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. But Emma, his daughter, needed closure more than anything. He couldn't keep her in the dark any longer. He stepped aside and motioned for Carla to come in. They sat in the living room, the air thick with tension. Carla didn't look at him, her gaze cast downward. James had no words to offer, no comfort to give. He simply waited, his heart pounding in his chest. I'm sorry," Carla whispered after what seemed like an eternity of silence. "I made the biggest mistake of my life, James, and I spent every single day regretting it." James looked at her, feeling the weight of her words, but also the bitterness that lingered. Years had passed. Their daughter had grown, and the hurt had rooted itself deep in their lives. He wanted to forgive her. He wanted to offer peace, but the anger still sat in his chest, heavy and sharp. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You hurt our daughter, Carla. You left her to deal with that pain by herself. She never deserved that." Carla nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I know, and I'll carry that with me forever. I wasn't a good mother. I wasn't the person I should have been." Her voice cracked as she continued. "But I need you to know that I've changed. I've been going to therapy, trying to become someone better. I know it's too late to fix things with Emma, but I want to try. I want to make amends, even if she doesn't want to hear it." James sat back, absorbing her words. For a moment, he felt a flicker of sympathy for her, an understanding of how lost and broken she had been. But that sympathy quickly turned to concern as he thought about Emma. She had been through so much already. Could he really open the door to Carla again? He stood up, walking to the window. The sun was setting outside, casting an orange glow over everything. He turned to face Carla, his voice softer now. "You've been gone for too long. Emma doesn't need you coming in and out of her life. She needs stability, not someone who's going to break her heart all over again." Carla's face crumpled, and for a moment, James saw the woman she used to be, the one he once loved. But he knew it wasn't enough. It couldn't be. "I understand," Carla said, her voice filled with regret. "I just wanted you to know how sorry I am. I never should have left her. I should have fought for her." James nodded slowly. He didn't respond right away. He didn't know if he would ever find a way to forgive her, but in this moment he realized something important. Emma was stronger than he had ever given her credit for. She had learned to live without Carla, and she had found her way back to herself. "I'll tell Emma you came by," James finally said, his voice steady. "But I think it's best if you give her time. Time to process things and time to decide for herself what kind of relationship, if any, she wants with you." Carla nodded, her face pale and worn. She stood up, and with one last look at James, she left the house. The door closed softly behind her, and for the first time in years, James felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had done the right thing. He had protected his daughter, as he always would. Emma came down the stairs a few minutes later, her face curious. "Who was that, Dad?" James gave her a warm smile, though his heart was still heavy. "That was your mother. She came to apologize." Emma paused, her eyes searching his face. Did she mean it? James sighed, sitting down beside her. "I think she did, sweetheart. But it's not something we can fix overnight. We'll take things slow, all right?" Emma nodded, looking out the window as the last rays of sunlight faded into the night. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. She had her father's love, and that was enough. Together, they would face whatever came next, side by side. And as James looked at Emma, he knew that he had fulfilled his promise, to protect her, to love her, and to guide her through whatever challenges life might throw their way. It was a promise he would keep forever.